So I'm here for conversations if anybody wants to speak to me.
No one wants to talk to you, go home.
Well, you don't. Tell me what rights you don't have that I have. It says trans rights are human rights.
To exist and live in a peaceful life.
Who's saying you shouldn't exist as a person?
The whole government, the entire media.
Pardon? They're not. No, that's your perception of it.
What was the?
Maybe this is it.
What was the? What was the court ruling the other week there?
Judgment, the rule that even
Yeah.
trans women with a gender confirmation certificate are not actually women.
There we go.
You know, that's
Thank
kind
you.
of like erasing trans women from public life.
No doubt.
A trans woman is a man.
There we go then. That's the
A
right.
trans.
Realizing there were lots of parts of it that made me like viscerally uncomfortable, like
Right, okay.
looking at my body hair, and that kind
Yeah.
of made me absurdly upset.
Okay.
And the only parts of me that really brought me any comfort were the parts of me that, you know, are what you would typically associate with, you know, cis women. Like, for example, I was born with quite narrow waist and wide hips. And that was something I got
Right.
from my mum, and that made me really happy. And I could never quite tell why that was the only part of me that I really liked about myself.
Okay.
Of course, at the time, I was out of education, and I wasn't really in any spaces that were like, you know, positive about trans people. And as a result of that, I kind of fell into a right-wing rabbit hole and ended up kind of hating trans people. I kind of thought of them as mentally ill, and even though I was, by definition, trans, I had to find ways to express it in ways that allowed me not to align with them. Then around 2019, I ended up coming out to myself. I ended up figuring, you know what, I can't stop pretending that I'm not anymore, you know? And I can't believe that I've been kind of arguing against these people for the longest time, when I've ended up, you know, realizing that, oh God, I've been trans for the longest time. And I can't help but think, in retrospect, because I started transitioning in November of 2024. It's still early days for me, but I can't help but think that my quality of life would have been a lot better if I had managed to explain what I was feeling to my psychiatrist a lot better, and then get put on blockers and then move on to hormones when I was 16.
Right. So you said you started to have these feelings of gender dysphoria
14.
since you was 14.
14 years old,
So
yeah.
you had none before then.
No, not really.
Okay.
I would say that the way that I was raised wasn't really gender specific. I was allowed to kind of do whatever I wanted. Like, I didn't really gravitate specifically towards anything that was explicitly male or female, you know. So, I mean, I'd play games like Burnout Revenge, you know, Call of Duty, but at the same time I had a pink Nintendo DS, and I'd play games like, I don't know, Cats, Cooking Mama, stuff like that. Stuff that you'd typically associate with being liked by, you know, young girls. So I didn't really have a childhood where I was forced into any boxes or allowed or prevented from, you know, wearing clothes that my parents didn't want me to wear, or, you know, they didn't stop me from playing games or having things that would typically be associated with girls.
Yeah. So what year was it when you were 14?
2014, the end
Right.
of 2014.
2014, 2015 was when there was a massive rise in people identifying as transgender.
Okay, but and I'm sure you're going to try and link that to an exposure, you know, to content that centered transgender people, or news stories, or, you know, increased media presence. But at the time, I didn't really have any exposure to any trans people in the media. Like, because the side of the internet that I was on was mainly focused around, you know, being right-wing. Like, I was heavily invested in American politics and the, you know, the presidency of Donald Trump at the time. Like, I was actually a virulent Trump supporter back in 2016. But prior to that, I wasn't really involved in any politics.
You've surprised me there, actually. Do you still subscribe to that, or has your views changed?
No, that guy's a cunt.
Oh. So, can you tell me then what it feels like, or what it means to feel like a girl?
You know what? Not really. I don't think that's a feeling that's innate to anyone. You know, I don't think you're born feeling a specific way. It's something that you grow up and then figure out yourself. You know, and I think that a lot of those things are defined by, you know, the society and the culture that we live in. You know, for example, if you look around at women and men, you'll see differences in the kind of styles that they adopt, the clothes that they wear, the way they style their hair.
Right.
And of course there are, you know, biological differences as well that are a result of things like, obviously, how they developed as a result of the hormones that they've had throughout puberty, you know, and other factors as well. I don't think that there is of course a lot of dimorphism, but there can also be cases where, dimorphism isn't so clear, and you can end up with people who are a lot more androgynous, and it's less defined,
Yeah.
even though they have gone through, the puberty that their sex would be expected to.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask, have you any kind of autistic traits or anything like that?
I was diagnosed with autism when I was about 6 years old, I think. But I want to add an extension to what I said before and say that, with it not being an innate feeling, the things that people associate with womanhood and manhood, there'll be some overlap between those things. So, there can be things like, being faithful or, being strong, riding an old steel bike
Yeah.
from the 1970s.
No, wow, it's nice
Which are all
that.
things that, it is. It's a Holdsworth equip that I've modified to be able to get around the hills around here more easily. But, these are all things that I associate with my personal experience of womanhood.
Just explain to me about autism, because I genuinely don't understand it that much. What are the traits and characteristics of somebody that has that?
Well,
I genuinely want to know
I've
this.
lived with it for a long time, and in that time I've kind of learned to mask it pretty well. But stilted speech can be one of them, like being a bit more verbose. It can be problems interacting with people, like having social issues. It can be having being anxious, anxiety. Sometimes it can be like having a fixation on like stacking things, or having specific fixations, or developing fixations on things, and just info dumping about them, learning lots of things about them. So, for example, with my transition hinging a lot on my on like a very basic knowledge of endocrinology, I've developed a fairly decent basic knowledge of how these things interact inside of my body.
I asked that because most of the children that was admitted to the Tavistock clinic with gender dysphoria was suffering from autism.
I'm aware of the argument, that there is an overlap between, there is a correlation, you might want to say, between autistic children and children who end up experiencing gender dysphoria or being trans-identifying. I don't think that's a reason to, remove their ability to decide if that's, the kind of treatment that they want to undergo. But also, I think what matters is considering the age range of the children that are being admitted to these clinics and the kind of treatment that we're receiving. Because obviously, up until a certain point, you can't really treat them medically. It's entirely social. Like changing names, pronouns, different dress styles. Changing names with peers and organisations, with school, with medical institutions like the NHS or any private insurers that they might have.
Yeah. Okay. And when you came out and told your parents, what did they say?
They were actually really accepting, and they would have been accepting. They've always been very accepting people, and they've always raised me to be accepting of other people's differences and tolerant of them as well. I didn't come out to them because at the time I kind of shut myself away. I started to experience those feelings, and then because of the kind of mentality that I'd adopted, I kind of just thought of myself as some kind of strange genetic failure.
Is that how you felt?
It was, yeah. I felt like my fate was kind of immutable, and that whatever I ended up trying to do to change that would just inevitably result in me failing and me being miserable. I didn't talk to my parents because I thought, well, what are they going to do about it?
Right.
Which is part of it, obviously, and the other part is, well, I don't expect them to understand that.
So how long ago was it that you came out as identifying as transgender?
So I came out as trans
at 14.
I didn't come out as trans until 2019. I knew about trans people. I would say I'd known about them, but hadn't really shown much interest or gravitated towards the identity or used the label myself. I think very briefly in 2015 or 2016, I did identify as agender, which is a non-binary identity, where I didn't necessarily identify as a male or a female.
Right.
But apart from that, I kind of came out with it, and then my friend group was kind of hostile towards it. They say, hey, what the fuck's this? And then I kind of just shut myself back in the closet and thought, okay, I'm not going to do that then.
So what stage of this process are you at now?
I've been on feminizing hormones for 7 months now. I'm undergoing laser hair removal, obviously, to get rid of all of this garbage on my face. Once DHT makes those follicles mature, they never stop pumping out hair. And then, later down the line, because I've been saving up money, I have been thinking about undergoing something like facial feminization surgery.
Right.
Just because I understand that, because of going through male puberty, there are going to be parts about my body that are not going to be changeable by hormones, like bone structure. And those are things I think would bring me a lot more comfort, like looking at myself in the mirror, but mainly going out into the world and interacting with other people.
And how far down the transition process are you going to go?
I am not sure. I don't really experience any bottom dysphoria.
Can you explain that?
Bottom dysphoria is just dysphoria over the genitalia that you have. A lot of trans women suffer from bottom dysphoria, and so they end up getting gender-confirming surgery that gives them, a vagina.
Right.
And then there are other trans women who are kind of like indifferent to it, or maybe like what they have and they decide to keep it. All I know is that even if I did, getting that done on the NHS would take, I think, upwards of 20 years at this point, and getting it done privately would probably cost over 30 grand. So,
what are you hoping to achieve from the transition process?
Really, I just like to walk out into the world. I just like to wake up in the morning, put on the same clothes that I put on every day, walk out into the world, and just have people look at me, and just see me as a girl. That's it.
Right.
That's all I really want, without having to make any drastic or fundamental changes to how I act or how I dress. So just throwing on a hoodie and some loose fitting jeans, and then walking out into the world, and being able to feel like I'm comfortable in myself.
Yeah. And do you think that's going to make you happy?
It is. So far, it's made me happier. Since I've been on hormones, and especially since I've been voice training, I have been passing as a woman more frequently, which does bring me quite a lot of joy. It's nice to have someone approach you and look at you in the face, and then still more or less, see you as a girl, even though I realise that there are quite a few bits of my appearance are still quite masculine.
Yeah. So you've identified as a female. Do you think then that you actually are biologically a female?
I think there are lots of different components that make up what constitutes a biological female. For example, my hormone profile, when I got my blood tests done, I had to be marked down as a female so that I could so that my hormones could be measured by the female reference ranges. So hormonally, yes, I am more or less a female.
But you've got XY chromosomes.
I'm actually not sure about that. I've considered the possibility that I might have an intersex condition called Klinefelter syndrome. So I'm aware. XY chromosomes.
I'm aware of Klinefelter. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because of the way that my body's developed, I'm kind of uncertain. And I think maybe there's a chance that I do have a non-standard karyotype.
Yeah. So I think Klinefelter. Do you have an extra X chromosome?
Yes, it would be an extra X.
Yeah,
so
it's a disorder of sexual development, isn't
yeah.
it? Yeah, and I think the common traits are that where men don't produce as much testosterone. That's one of them.
Yes, it can also result in, there are textbook cases where they can be slightly taller. You can have breast development, improper development of the testes, infertility, stuff like that. I recently learned actually that a lot of people with Klinefelters don't actually look exactly like a textbook case, and there are quite a lot of men who look, quite like your typical man, except the fact that they have XY chromosomes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you what, I must admit it's been great to have a conversation, because that's the reason I'm here. I think that, particularly with you being autistic, I think that transgender is a psychological delusion. I don't like to say mental health, because people see that as derogatory, but I don't think it should.
Delusion is a very harsh way of putting it. I think that's...
Do you think that's harsher than saying it's a mental health condition? Would that be more accurate?
I think it would be very hard. I think that is a very harsh way of putting it, and I think it would be, if you were going to call it anything, if you were going to, stick it in the DSM-5, then calling it a mental health condition would be an appropriate way of doing it.
It's in DSM-5, isn't it?
But the thing is, if it's a mental health condition, then it necessitates treatment, and yet every single study that has been done on the treatment of transgender women and men has shown that gender-affirming care is the most reliable way of treating gender dysphoria.
What, like surgery?
It can be surgery. It doesn't necessarily have to be surgery, but usually that just means hormone replacement therapy to develop, secondary sex characteristics that are, more typical of the gender that they identify with.
Did you know that the suicide rate goes up by 19% after gender-affirming care?
I mean, I would like the source for that study, if you have it.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that is the case.
I'll give you the source.
I believe that other studies that have been produced have shown that the suicide rate actually goes down.
I'll give you the source of the study. So if you go to a website, which is segm.org, it stands for the Society of Ethical-Based Gender Messaging. SEG.org. Go there, and all the studies are on there. segm.org, and you'll find it there.
But aside from, all of the statistics, because I think we could sit down and we could bring out, like dossiers of different studies and meta-analyses. My personal experience contradicts that, because I was 14 when I started experiencing gender dysphoria. I was a transgender child. And, having the support, because the way I worded it to my child psychiatrist was, it was a bit wishy-washy. The way I worded it was like, oh, I have all of these different characters. I want to dress up as different characters, and all of them are girls. And towards the end of it, he talks to me and says, oh, you might want to look into this bloke called Eddie Izzard. And in 2018, Eddie Izzard comes out as gender fluid.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's a kind of, that's a wonderful long-term irony that I kind of look back on. But yeah. One of the biggest regrets in my life is not starting earlier, because since I've started hormones, I think the quality of my life has improved drastically.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, it's been great chatting with you. I really appreciate it, because we've allowed each other to speak.
Yeah.
You could teach these people a lesson on how to have a conversation, because they either shout you down. That one shouts, see what I mean? So that one shouts you down.
Oh, she's fantastic.
Well, she's a great singer.
She owns the street.
Ah,
she's
right.
Absolutely wonderful.
Right. Well, she's a great singer, and then this person won't talk to me.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
I can definitely understand that.
But you have, and I've given you a chance to speak, and I've been respectful.
I think the reason why I wanted to talk to you was just to share my own personal experience.
That's what I'm here for.
And enter into, a debate about the larger topic. But yeah, no, I completely disagree with that. And there are a lot of other children who will have the exact same experience as me and grow up with the exact same regrets as me. Not being able to transition younger and prevent the development of secondary sex characteristics that, are going to stick with them and cause them a lot of dysphoria, which is obviously going to increase risk of suicidality.
Are you aware of all the detransitioners?
I'm aware that there are a lot of detransitioners, yes, but I'm also aware that a lot of people detransition for reasons outside of the fact that they don't no longer experience gender dysphoria and wish to transition. That can be financial reasons, it can be for the sake of their safety, it can be for political reasons, so there are more reasons that people will detransition than just because, they don't feel like they're trans anymore. I think their experiences are perfectly valid, and I think that there should be a lot better care for people who do decide to do transition after the fact, especially ones who have gone through surgical procedures in order to correct those and give them back the features that they have obviously undergone surgeries to remove.
What do you think about the slogan which the trans rights activists go? I was in Manchester. On Saturday there was a trans rights protest, and quite a few of them had signs that said death before detransition.
I completely agree. I would rather die than go back to how I was before I started transitioning. If you gave me a gun and gave me the option to live the rest of my life as the person I was before, I'd blow my brains out.
Seriously?
Absolutely. It was miserable. The only thing in my life that gave me any kind... I had two things that I did in my life. I worked around 40 hours a week, and then every time I finished work, 5 days of the week, I'd cycle 30 miles home when a beeline to home is 2.4 miles. The only thing my life existed for the sake of was marginal gains in cycling and just building up money, hoping, okay, this is going to be the year that I do it. This is going to be the year that I do it. I'm going to transition now. But wait, is it too late for me? Maybe, no, there's no hope for me. Maybe I should try and make a career as a cyclist. And eventually I kind of came to the conclusion that, I'm going to win a local race, I'm going to have a podium finish, I'm going to say I wish I transitioned when I was 15, and then I'm going to overdose on sleeping pills.
So are you going to enter?
You receive, and in cycling, in terms of your body's ability to effectively supply your muscles with enough oxygen to support a given effort.
If you did, would you enter the men's or the women's category?
Pre-transition, obviously, I would have entered the men's. I believe there's actually an organisation or a race called the Lightning Crit, and I like them because they don't segregate based on gender. I believe they have different racks based on performance of the candidates.
Okay.
So instead of separating by gender, they will take things like power output, peak power. I'm not sure how they do it, but they separate out by, similarly to how you'd separate out people by weight class, essentially, which I think
separated
is a really good way
performance.
of doing it,
That's a kind of compromise.
Because obviously there's going to be, if you look at any kind of large collection of functional threshold power statistics, on the higher end, yes, men on average are going to be much better than women because of their superior anaerobic capacities. Because testosterone is an anabolic steroid. In the 7 months that I've transitioned, I've actively noticed that even though I put in a similar amount of volume, my performance has just decreased. That's how it works,
Increase, you mean?
No, decrease. It's decreased.
Sorry, no.
Yeah, less
yes,
testosterone.
sorry,
means
less
that
testosterone.
For maintain muscle mass.
In my head, then I just thought that you was taking. So obviously, you'll be taking estrogen.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, of course. So it's taking it down. You mentioned when I said about detransitioners and the reasons. You said there's multiple reasons.
Of course there are. Yeah.
One of them you said was financial reasons. Can you explain that one?
So, because of the state of trans healthcare in the UK right now, and the length of waiting times, because last time I got in contact with my GP, there were people who had been referred in 2019 who were still waiting for assessments,
right.
And that was at the start of 2025. There are private options available, but obviously they're quite expensive. And then there's the other option, which is having to DIY your own care, which is having to acquire your medications from unregulated online pharmacies or home brewers in order to, medically transition, which is what I'm having to do because I can't really afford to go private at the moment. And also waiting on the NHS is absolutely not an option at this point.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot. Well, I know that there's a lot of vested interest into getting people to identify as trans. Do you know how much one trans person is worth to the pharmaceutical industry over their lifetime?
I have no idea. Hundreds of thousands, probably, because of the cost of medications. It depends on what they're on, because if they're started on puberty blockers and they're given Lupron, because of the copyright on Lupron and the fact that it's not manufactured by anyone else, that's a very expensive GnRH. I can't remember if it's an agonist or an antagonist. Estrogen's pretty cheap. Cyproterone acetate is pretty cheap. Bicalutamide, a little bit expensive. Spironolactone, cheap shit anti-androgen, to be honest. It's mainly used as an anti-mineralocorticoid. Right.
Yeah, so each person they've worked out is worth $1.5 million to the pharmaceutical industry.
Oh yeah, I can imagine there are more expensive surgeries.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know where they've gotten that figure from, because that's quite absurd when you consider that, I don't know, maybe the most you'd pay for facial feminization surgery is around 50 grand.
It's the lifetime on opposite sex hormones which is calculated. I got it out of a book. I think it was Helen Joyce's book.
Let me do some maths here.
Shreya.
Let me do some maths. So I can estimate because I'm on 4 milligrams of estrogen a day and 12.5 milligrams of cyproterone acetate every day. So because I split my tablets into 12.5 milligram quarters, that means a single box of 50 tablets is going to last me 200 days, which is 200 days for around 50 pounds. And 3 bottles of estrogen, which is around 300 tablets, which is 150 days of doses. That's around 130.
So it'll be different for different people depending on what drugs they're on. Like you said, Lupron was really expensive in America.
Yeah, but Lupron is generally only used as a puberty blocker.
Yeah.
It can be used after puberty because it still inhibits the body's ability to produce testosterone, but it's less commonly used. Yeah. Primarily because of how expensive it is, and some insurers in places where private healthcare is one of the only ways of getting gender affirming care, insurers won't cover it because they don't see it as necessary.
Lupron's the main one that's used in the United States. What's the one called in the UK which begins with T?
T?
Yeah, I can't remember the name. It was another puberty blocker. I can never remember it. I'm always forgetting it.
There are so many. Yeah. There's Lupron, there's Buserelin, there's... I almost had it then. I think I've seen it before, but I don't remember what it's called.
I have trouble reciting them sometimes. I've got a lot of the stats in my head.
So we're going to move on to the... I believe I know what talking point we're moving on to now, and it's that puberty blockers are also used in the chemical castration of sex offenders.
I wasn't going to go down there, but we can do.
Yeah, I mean, let's get that one out of the way.
Come on.
If you want to chemically castrate someone, what's the most effective way of doing that?
Chemically castrate them? I don't know. Well,
chemical castration means that you're not physically castrating,
Yeah. So, give them Lupron, I would say.
Not necessarily. You can do it with high doses of cyproterone acetate. Basically, anything that interferes with the HPG axis, which is responsible for the production of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which in men will cause the production of testosterone. So if you prevent that, your body won't produce testosterone anymore. For example, taking exogenous estrogen will interfere with the production of testosterone. It will reduce the body's production of testosterone because your body kind of wants to maintain a biological equilibrium. Yeah. So what you can do is you can use in the same way that high doses of estrogen are used in monotherapy to suppress testosterone in trans women, high doses can also be used to suppress testosterone in, sex offenders. They can also be used at the same time in the treatment of prostate cancer because it reduces.
That was one of the things it was licensed for. Yeah,
yes,
I'll give you that.
It reduces the amount of prostate-specific androgen causing the prostate.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah. I'll give you that. That was it. And there was also precocious puberty as well. But
exactly,
but do you know what? There was. I wouldn't say you should give this even to children that have precocious puberty. You've got people now that are grown up into adults that were put on Lupron, so they were put on puberty blockers, and they didn't fully develop the bones and they didn't fully develop the cognitive ability, and they're suing the pharmaceutical industries now.
I'm guessing that there can be potential risks. I mean, my personal opinion is that puberty blockers should be skipped entirely. Like, I would have liked it if when I'd realised this and I'd, been able to talk to my therapist about it, I'd been, put onto, the gender clinic and then moved on to hormone replacement therapy, as opposed to being put on blockers and then having to wait a few more years to go, being deficient in both sex hormones to, start HRT, because obviously a deficiency of both sex hormones can result in, can have a lot of different risks associated with it.
Yeah.
So while I think puberty blockers were like the compromise to not just putting transgender teenagers onto HRT so that they can go through the puberty that they want to go through,
Well, it's stopping their development into an adult, basically.
Which is,
and they're not reversible.
And while I have heard that there are lots of studies that show that puberty blockers are more or less harmless, delaying
That's
development,
not true.
I don't think delaying development is a good thing, but my position isn't to deny healthcare to transgender youth, it's to give it to them.
Maybe
because I stand here as an example of someone who had to go through that experience when I was younger and going through puberty, and my life would have been a lot better if I'd been, if someone had explained to me what I was feeling, if I'd been allowed to start that medication and then grow up as the gender that I felt more comfortable, identifying with.
Right. I mean, do you think maybe that just sitting down and having some talking therapy with people would have helped when you were younger? Just to explore that. I think that's probably the best route.
I don't really know, because the parts of me that were causing me distress were parts that were on my body. I mean, I remember walking down the field to the shop just down the road from me, and then realising that my facial hair was only going to get thicker and grow back faster. And one day I'd shave it off, and it would still be there underneath the skin, visible. And that was a mortifying feeling. Like, after a long time, you kind of get used to it. Like, like if you've, let's say you walk on hot coals for long enough, you'll get used to the feeling. And then obviously once you step off, you'll be like, oh my God, that's what I was doing to myself?
Right.
There are lots of ways that you can, and obviously my obsessive amounts of cardio and the fact that I just took any opportunity to work more and more hours at work was part of the coping mechanism that I used to reduce how dysphoria impacted my life. But it invariably did, and in every single daydream where I was out there stomping around the hills, I was a girl.
Right. But you do know, though, that no matter how you feel, that biologically, no matter what you do, biologically you will always be a man. That's the harsh reality of biology. Whether, objective reality exists outside of our thoughts and feelings.
I don't know. I don't think it's as concrete as that. Because while on a chromosomal level you could say I'm a man, there also exist women with Swires syndrome, which is a condition which causes a woman to develop, with XY chromosomes instead of XX chromosomes.
Yeah, there are rare disorders of sexual development.
Exactly.
And
while there are rare, there's still incidences that mean that you end up with people numbering in the 50 to 100,000 range, and that's not an insignificant amount of people, and I don't think that their existence should be discounted for the sake of affirming your reality.
I'm not discounting anybody's existence whatsoever. I think people that are born with a disordered sexual development, you've been dealt a real bad card in life, unfortunately, and those people deserve all the sympathy, that we should give them.
Exactly,
they really do.
But
you haven't got that.
The point that I'm trying to make is that a woman who is born with Swires syndrome, who has XY chromosomes, is still a woman, isn't she?
Pardon?
A woman who is born with Swires syndrome is still a woman, isn't she?
I'll have to check out that DSD. This is something new to me, so I don't know. So I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
But, what determines whether you're a woman or not is basically what your body's reproductive system was designed to do. So, for example, if somebody's got 5-ARD, do you know about 5-ARD?
5-alpha reductase deficiency.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah, you've got it.
I know all about 5-alpha reductase.
So that was people like Imane Khalif, the boxer in the Olympics, was 5 ARD. Caster Semenya, the South African athlete in the 2012 Olympic Games, right? Caster Semenya had 5 ARD. They were born with, female genitalia, but they still had testicles, either inside them or in the labial lips. All right, they just didn't develop male genitalia. That was the thing that happened to them.
So where exactly do they fit in, according to you? Because apparently you're a male or female based on what your reproductive organs are intended to do.
Yes, they were male because they had testicles. They were male, but they had ambiguous or female-looking genitalia.
What's your name, mate?
Pardon?
What's your name, mate?
My name, I'm Steve James.
Have a terrible day.
Thank you. I've had a lot worse than that. Come on, I've had a lot worse.
Have you bread thrown at you?
I've had chili sauce and golden syrup thrown at me.
Not chili sauce with golden syrup.
And I've been,
I had my jaw broken by a man.
Well, thank God for the
because of way that I
civility
was
of the
dressed.
British Republic.
and I've been smacked in the face twice and punched in the chest.
You get what you did. You get what you did.
Well, I've never hit anybody.
Well, you're spreading information that leads children to kill themselves and not want to go outside and live horrible lives.
I mean, that is an interesting
Really?
point to touch on. That is
Really?
an interesting point to touch on, that opposing the treatment of transgender children in favour of trying to therapy their gender dysphoria away.
Wait.
Sorry,
It's all right.
sorry, my bike hates
That's all right.
transphobes. Trying to
You
therapy
called me.
them away.
That's the first insult you throw my way. You were doing well. I didn't think you would insult me. I thought we was going to have a respectable conversation, but you've thrown an insult. I didn't think you would. I thought better of you than that.
Oh, come on.
I
I'm
did.
so good. I'm so
You
good.
have been good. You have been
so
good.
I'm so good. I'm wonderful. I'm gorgeous.
Okay.
Oh,
What?
okay, that's it.
Well, you just insulted me, haven't you? You just insulted
Oh,
me.
come on, there are worse things. You've been called worse things.
Yes,
haven't
I have,
You?
I
You've been
have.
called worse. You've probably been called every name under the sun.
Absolutely, I have. Yeah.
But yes, I think the opposition of providing, healthcare to transgender youth is something that contributes to the higher rates of, suicidality in transgender youth.
Do you know what?
And also the fact that, I think in the past, God knows how many years, most papers have featured some story about trans people in a negative light. The way the media seems to be, going at us right now, it doesn't seem to be fair. At the end of the day, once you scratch the surface of any agenda that we have, we're just people who want to live a normal life like everyone else.
What's the biggest cohort of suicides in the UK? The biggest suicide group cohort?
That's not a statistic that I know, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I'll educate you. It is men my age, 45 to 54, and it's twice the rate of people that identify as transgender, according to the study that was done by the Tavistock Clinic. And I can tell you about that study if you want.
I think that's an interesting conversation to have. But I think that's more or less that's more of an indictment of the UK's mental health treatment at the moment. The waiting lists on the NHS are ridiculous. It's overstressed, it's underfunded, it's understaffed. We do not have the resources to provide treatment to all of the people in this country, and I think it's an absolute disgrace that so many, men and women, don't have that kind of care, and have to wait so long for that care. And I also think that, the increase in suicidality across all groups, and particularly in men, is potentially due to the kind of economic situation that we're in now. People have less money to spend on things.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Companies are cutting hours.
That's part of it.
People are lonely. People are becoming more disconnected and atomized. But I think that conversation is something that exists, that doesn't really have any kind of overlap with why trans people express a higher rate of suicidality compared to the average population.
Yeah. I mean, my point is that the suicide rate is it's still really, really low amongst trans identifying people. It's no different than people with other mental health comorbidities. It's the same, but nobody's talking about the highest rate. People that are identifying as trans use that all the time to play the victim and say that they're oppressed.
All people need to do is look in their pants and knickers and tell them what they are.
Well, that's biological reality.
It's telling me I'm King Charles. What are you, King Charles?
Explain that to me. What do you mean it's telling me I'm King Charles?
You should look in their pants and it'll tell them what they are.
Who said that? Did he say that?
Yes, that's what he said.
Oh, I didn't know that. I did not know that.
That's what he said.
When did he say that?
Just now as he was walking by.
King Charles? No, that bloke did.
No, that bloke said they should look in their pants
but
and
where
that'll
does
tell them.
where
So
does
I
King
looked-
Charles come
So I
into
looked
it?
in mine and I jokingly said, "Oh, it's told me I'm King Charles."
Oh right, okay.
Yeah, it's a,
I don't understand the reference.
I don't know, you could pick any name.
Right, okay.
I could open up my pants and it could tell me I was Camilla Parker Bowles for all I care. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't really matter. Like, the material reality of my sex, regardless of what it is not really going to have a bearing on how most people treat me.
Now
Like, when I look
you
at
must
you-
admit I've treated you with respect.
Oh yeah, of course you have.
Yeah, that's what I do. When people treat me with respect, even if they don't treat me with respect, I don't like to copy them and drop down to their.
I mean, I can
lower.
see, I can see the angle that you're trying to come at it from. Yeah, but it's just I've seen those arguments before, and I've read enough and I've had enough of an experience myself to be able to say, well, no, I disagree with it. Here's why you're wrong.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that people are using suicidality to claim that they're the victims, because by the same token I could potentially turn that around and say, well, how do you know that those men aren't doing the exact same thing?
Well,
To claim that they are, that they have it hard in life, that they have it hard in the world. Like, yeah, of course, no shit. Like, all of these different factors are adding up, and they're having a detrimental effect on the general population's mental health. And that is something that is especially prevalent in men at the moment. I mean, one of the most common cancers that's experienced is prostate cancer, and yet it's one that's not as commonly talked about.
Yeah.
I see men all the time where I work wearing Andy's Man Club armbands. I see it advertised, I see stickers around. And it's great that men have support networks like that where they can go and they can talk with other men who are having those problems. But obviously, it's not enough, and something needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not something that's limited to, men's mental health problems. I think that that's something that, everyone's mental health problems are getting worse.
Yeah.
People are racked with more and more neuroses than ever as a result of the state of the world and the state of geopolitics. And obviously, when you have a country that is still still suffering from austerity, still has a healthcare service that's buckling under the weight of the amount of people who need care, you're going to end up with a runaway situation where the situation just gets worse and worse for people. I mean, go and look in Halifax. The high street's dying. You walk around for long enough, you'll see quite a few people sitting outside trying to scrounge up a few pennies for a drink or like a G or a quarter or an R.
Yeah.
Do you know?
God, that's noisy.
But I think we're digressing a bit.
Yeah. We can wrap it up if you want.
I mean, when I talk about
Get these noisy motorbikes out of the way first.
When I talk about my experience with suicidality as transgender youth, it's because when those things are happening to you and they're happening and there's nothing you can do about them, there's nothing that you feel you can do about them.
Yeah. Well, do you know what I say? My mantra is I say to people, you can identify as what you want. If you, like yourself, want to identify as the opposite sex, you're an adult. Now, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 24 years old.
You're 24. Okay, so people say, I don't know how true it is, that your brain's fully developed at about 25. I don't know.
That's what they say, yeah.
I don't know if mine is.
But the fun thing is, in the 10 years that I've experienced gender dysphoria, that hasn't changed.
Right. Okay.
It's varied in intensity,
right.
But obviously once I turned around and confronted those feelings after pushing them down for so long, they more or less came back with the exact same intensity that I experienced them when I was a teenager.
Yeah. So what I say to people, if you're an adult, you go and identify as you want, live your life how you please, but I do put a caveat on that. I say, as long as what you do in your life doesn't adversely affect anybody else.
Well, yeah.
That's what I say. Does that sound fair enough?
I mean, yeah, well, obviously that sounds fair enough, yeah. But I feel like the implication here is that there are some aspects of being trans that do adversely impact everyone else.
Yes, absolutely.
There you go. I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
I knew that was
coming. I wasn't trying to hide it, and that is, where men, biological males, going into female spaces where they're not wanted. That's one of them. That includes sport, toilets, locker rooms.
I've heard the sport argument, and I know that there are some papers that have been floating around that have been used to argue against trans women in sport. I think that it's something that should be more extensively studied, for example, on transgender women who have been undergoing hormone therapy for a very long time. I know that there are arguments that suggest that innate biological advantages that men have to sit through hormone replacement therapy. I think that's something that should be investigated more. I don't think that there's enough data on it right now to come to a comprehensive conclusion on whether they should be excluded. But I think that one of the better solutions to it would be scrapping gender segregation in sports and instead doing it by performance instead. That's something that creates a fair environment for everyone.
It could maybe be a third category. It might be difficult to administer.
It would be difficult to administer because I imagine most trans people who are suggested to this third category would probably say, no,
Yeah.
I'm not being othered, I'm not being put in the other category.
Do you think
and I agree, like, no, why should you have to do that just because you're trans?
Do you think it opens a loophole for male cheats to be able to go into women's sports, take their trophies away from them, take scholarships, take prize money, beat them up?
Most sports
Doesn't
organisations... Most sports organisations that do,
I can tell you where it does if you want.
Hey, most sports organisations that do allow trans women to participate, I believe they administer mandatory hormone tests to confirm that their hormone ranges are in the acceptable level for cisgender women. Obviously, that doesn't work for everyone because there are cisgender women who will have hormones that are outside of those ranges. There are outliers.
It's not actually that much around testosterone levels. It's the fact that you've been through male puberty and then you were built as a man, so you've got a bigger lung capacity, bigger bone density, more muscles, broader shoulders.
The lung capacity isn't the be-all, end-all of it.
I didn't just give you that. I give you, more dense bones.
I just wanted to attack on a comment to the lung capacity thing. Yes,
it's a massive advantage.
Lung capacity is an advantage, but the other component of that is VO2 max, which is your body's ability to supply oxygen to your muscles. So on average, men are going to have a higher VO2 max because their hearts are going to have a larger volume on account of them having more testosterone. They're going to have more efficient body because
What about Nick? I always get this name wrong. The Welsh rugby player. I think it's Nicholas Gareth Morgan. Identifies as a female, calls himself Kelly Morgan, and he plays for Porth Harlequins Welsh rugby team, women's rugby team. 6 foot, call him the Beast. All right, broke the coach's ankle playing touch rugby, folded an opposing player like a deck chair. That's what the captain of his team said. What do you think about that?
I don't really have a comment on that.
Do you think it's wrong?
I haven't heard of that. But
Look it up.
I know that rugby is a fairly aggressive sport, and I know that people suffer quite a few injuries playing rugby.
Particularly if men play against women, because they're bigger and stronger.
I know with that kind of size difference, obviously there are going to be risks involved. Yeah.
So that's why this ideology is harmful. Do you want me to tell you about a case where a man went into identified as a woman, went into mixed martial arts, cage fighting, and broke the orbital bone in her skull?
I imagine that's probably not the only time a woman's broken her orbital skull.
Yeah, but this is a man beating a woman up. This is a man beating a woman up. His name was Boyd Burton. All right, he was a United States Marine. He did the transition, didn't tell them. He fought a woman called Tamika Brents, kneed her in the face.
Wait, so she transitioned and then rocked up?
No, he transitioned to a woman.
So her pronouns would be she, her.
Yeah, no, it's still a he.
Yeah, but her pronouns would be she, her.
Well, she can say that, but anyway, the fact is that a man beat a woman up in the ring.
See, wait, you're telling me she rocked up to the competition?
Yep.
They could not even tell that she was trans?
No, passed really well. Look it up. Go on to YouTube. Fallon Fox, he called himself. That's his stage name, Fallon Fox.
I think I know her. Pink hair, right? Does she have pink hair?
Don't think so. But yeah, would you condemn that? Because
fully transitioned.
His opponent didn't know. Tamika Brents, who was a really good fighter, said, "I'd never felt strength like it." And 2 minutes, knee to the face, broken orbital bone.
I think a knee to the face would do that to you.
Especially if it's a man on a woman.
Well, it depends on how long she'd been transitioning for. Obviously, if you've gotten that far in your transition, you're going to have changes to your bone density and your muscle mass that are going to impact your performance. I mean,
So you sound like you think it's all right. Man beating up a woman.
I don't appreciate the angle that you're coming at this from. You're trying to box me
Reality.
You're trying to box me in and say, oh, so
Giving
you
you the
support
facts.
men beating up women. Obviously,
well, that's what happened.
That's literally what the sport is about. It's about people beating each other up.
Yes, but it's sex separated. It's sex segregated. So for safety, You know, because it's a dangerous sport anyway, so you've got to put there's certain safety rules, like you can't knee somebody in the face or kick them in the face when the knees are on the floor. There's certain rules in place, but one of the rules is probably the biggest safety rule is it's separated by biological sex.
Yes, but that's also discounting things like I just stated, like
Right.
long-term transition changes in things like bone density and muscle mass that are obviously going to impact performance.
Yeah, so
obviously, if someone knees you in the head full force, there's a good chance that it's going to break some bone in there.
especially if it's a man doing it to a woman.
Yes, but once again, you're kind of
Nice bike,
ignoring,
innit? He's
you're kind of
looking.
ignoring the point that I'm making.
What's your point?
In regards to how long-term hormone replacement therapy changes things like bone density and muscle mass.
Right. Okay, so
Like,
all right.
I'm never, ever going to be the same strength that I was pre-transition.
Yeah.
Never. I could train until the cows come home. I will never be hitting 400 watts for 4 minutes like I was before.
Yeah.
So,
But still higher than women. You'll still have massive higher testosterone levels than women. You know?
no. That's something I'm going to completely disagree with.
Thank you.
Because I have...
100%
Sorry.
behind you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and you're doing a grand job.
Cheers.
So I got my levels
I'm up against it here. I'm up against it, but that's
I
fine.
got my levels tested 3 months into
Go on.
HRT.
How many nanomoles of testosterone have you got in your system?
I think it came back at like... I didn't do nanomoles, I do nanograms a deciliter. 12 nanograms a deciliter.
How? Right.
I think
that's
that's
12.
around... Like... I know that it's
I think the scale would be still the same. You said 12. Women have 1.7.
1.7 nanomoles.
And men normally have about 30
Hold on,
at the lower end.
let's have a look.
All right, I'm still a.
Have you had a coffee or anything?
I'm going to go and have one in a second. Can I give you some money? I'll buy you one as well. I'll come down and have a sit down and have a coffee. Could you get us a mocha, please?
A mocha?
Yes, please. Thank you. Just give me a second. I'm going to get my water bottle.
We've never had issues but we've been having
0.42 nanomoles a litre.
0.42.
Yep. It's actually on the lower end of the reference range for female
Is it?
hormones. Yes.
That's what you've got. Wow.
For testosterone, yeah. So that shit is... Don't.
Right. Wow.
So no, I have nowhere near the same capacity that I did back when my hormone levels were in the range.
No,
that would typically
yeah,
man.
I wasn't arguing that point. The point that I was trying to make, and I might be wrong on this, but even men that are on, they're on cross-sex or opposite-sex hormones, they still have higher testosterone levels than women. I think that's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, that point is completely incorrect. It can vary. Some trans women can have trace amounts of testosterone.
Yeah.
Others can have in a higher range, higher range of the female reference range. Some
Right.
people like me can be in the lower half of it.
Yeah, the statistics I got was something like women have average 1.7 nanomoles. An exceptional female athlete will have like up to 7, whereas generally the average for men was about 30.
Well, yeah, obviously, like you
And that's the lower end,
pump out testosterone.
average or lower end. Yeah. So, yeah.
So
that's
yeah,
what I thought.
transgender women
Yeah.
can have like on average less testosterone than cis women.
Right.
Because like it depends
I'll
on
have
the
to check
antiandrogen
that.
that's being used. Like, but generally the idea is to suppress it into the below, like I think it's 2 nanomole range per liter.
Right. Right. Okay.
But yes, my testosterone levels are in the lower end of the reference range for
Right.
women.
Okay. Wow. And how does that make you feel?
Well, my body hair grows back thinner and it grows
Right.
back slower and sparser. Same with facial hair, it's softer, easier to shave. It grows back slower.
Right.
Obviously, I'm seeing decreased muscle mass on my arms.
You still
my
look like
arms-
you've got bigger biceps than the average woman. Go
Well,
on.
yeah,
Look
you
at that. Come on, man.
I used to
Yes.
lift.
Right. Well, you've still got decent guns on you, I must say.
Well, see, my genetics are
That's
cool
what I'm
because
saying.
my body has a propensity for building muscle. If I throw
Because you're a man.
myself,
That's because you're a man.
No, seriously, I always think I wouldn't get my fluid intake, I wouldn't get my
Right.
electrolytes, I wouldn't even track my protein intake. I'd just pick things up and my body
Right.
would pile on muscle.
Okay.
I could just keep going and going and going and I would not stop.
Yeah. And that's because that's a trait of some men, not women.
trait of someone who just like wanted to forget about everything.
Yeah.
It was a trait of someone who just wanted to live in the saddle rather than someone who wanted to live life. Like, the average man is not, like, even now, even though I'm transitioning, the average man is not doing what I'm doing when it comes to athletics. And that's something that I completely respect, you know? But if you put me up against any professional female athlete, I would get shit stomped. Like, there's no chance.
Yeah, I mean, even as a man, you wasn't a professional athlete, was you?
No, I wasn't.
That's just biology, isn't it? Some women are awesome at sports.
If I'd put in the effort, I probably could have been like a mid-captain rider.
Yeah. Can you name me one Olympic sport where females score higher than males? Let's take away equestrian because that's down to the horse, isn't it?
I don't really. You see, outside of like cycling and running, I'm not really interested in sports.
Yeah. Right.
So these are things I don't actually know.
Yeah. Right. Well, there isn't. There's not a single one. There's not a single sport where females in the Olympics score higher than males.
But should we realise that in every single one of those sports, the men that are competing are not going to be men who are on feminising hormone replacement therapy?
No, I'm just saying this is the difference between, females and males.
Because they're not on feminising hormone replacement therapy. They have testosterone ranges that are in the normal level for men. And they will be doing training volumes that are typical for men with those hormone levels.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I mean, and you can take it on an average, men are much stronger, faster, fitter than women. There are the outliers of women. I mean, I do CrossFit, CrossFit is one of the most difficult.
Talk about one hell of an outlier, Beryl Burton.
Go on,
absolute legend.
Is she? I bet you're going to tell me she's an endurance athlete. Oh, was she the swimmer?
No, she wasn't. She was a cyclist, and I believe back in her day, she set a 100-mile record or a 12-hour record that stood over the men's record for 2 years before anyone could beat it.
Right, I'll go and have a look. What was she called?
Beryl Burton. Absolute legend. Honestly, one of my inspirations as a cyclist.
Beryl Burton. I'll go and check that.
She dominated women's cycling. Yeah. It was incredible. I think she got it. I think she's like standing in like I think she's next to like Eddie Merckx as one of the greatest athletes who ever lived.
I mean, in endurance sports, some women are that good, they'll beat a lot of men, but they won't beat the best men.
I mean, once you get to a certain point, once you get to like ultra endurance stuff, that's when like those advantages start running much more thin, and they're much more marginal because of the kind of like, because of the sheer length of those efforts and the amount of like willpower it takes at that
absolutely,
point. There comes a point where it's not just your body, it's your mind.
I know that. I know that. I'm an ex-Green Beret soldier. I've been through the All Arms Commando course. I know what endurance is all about.
That shit's hell.
It is, absolutely. I mean, I was a sportsman as well. This is why I'm so angered when mediocre males go into female sports.
I don't think they're doing. I don't think
stealing the trophies and scholarships.
I don't think that phenomenon is as common as you're making out.
Oh, it's a lot more common than you think.
I don't think most men.
Thank you, mate.
See you with Charlie Beach sometimes in Manchester, so that's why.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
I don't think most men are going to decide to hop onto feminising hormones just so they can steal a trophy because
they don't have to.
They're going to grow.
They don't have to. They don't have to. They can self-ID, don't have to take anything, and then enter female sports.
I think
just look at Leah Thomas.
I think there are a decent amount of organisations that prevent the participation. Like, for example, the UCI.
What's that?
The governing body for most cycling events, like the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, they do not allow the participation of trans women in women's cycling. But not just that, I know that a lot of other sports organisations that do allow the participation once again rely on testing hormone ranges in order to determine, whether that participant is, valid to participate.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think they're just going to allow anyone who decides to self-ID into those sports.
Yeah. Okay. No. Right. Listen, I've got a coffee coming. It's been mainly respectful. You only insulted me once or twice.
Mainly
once.
Respectful?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been so civil.
Once you was, you? What was it you said? Can't even remember. What did you call me?
I don't know.
I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
Right, okay. Anyway, other than that, it's been all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go and get a drink now.
Yeah, but anyway, if you ever figure out a time machine, can you send me back to 2015 so I can get put on hormones?
Okay, will do.
Cheers.
See you later, man. Thank you. That's what a respectful conversation should be like.
Your opinion on respect,
He did.
You've come to Hebden Bridge where
He did.
you have not the
He did. There's lots of people do. Lots of people do.
Care about what you have to
What
say.
you are, you're the...
15,000 people, so many.
You guys, you are the vocal minority. There is a large silent majority.
You have 15,000 followers.
Yeah.
sweet pea.
You are the
in
vocal-
a 62 million
Right, okay.
people country.
Yeah. Oh, cheers, man. Should we join this lady here because she's been supporting me as well? I'll keep that because they might.
I agree.
Yeah. I will do. Yeah. 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 I'll go and get me. I'll cover them up as well. But
I'll keep an eye.
yeah, I'm just going to get a thing to put it on. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't expect to be spending so much of my time standing.
Yeah, but thank you. I appreciate it. I do.
It's a beautiful town.
Cheers, guys. I did have a bin bag there and it's gone. Might have been put in the bin. Oh well. Oh well. Oh, that's the one. That's the one. That's the one. Oh.